Welcome to this episode of the Ideas Factory. I'm Naghma. With me is Professor Harsh Pant. The US election is finally just around the corner, and the final round of campaigning is going on in full steam. Other than that, the world has seen the horrific beheading in France of a school teacher, and after that, an attack outside a church in Nice. We've seen reactions from world over condemning these attacks, but we've also seen the Islamic countries coming together in an attack on the French President Emmanuel Macron. And when we look at this, we also have to understand the geopolitical power play that's going on in the background, which is why some countries are taking certain positions. So we will try to look at that in this episode of the Ideas Factory. India has come out openly and very clearly in support of France. So that's cementing India-France relationship too. Harsh, I want to begin with what's happening in France. Erdogan, if we look at what happened in France, has been an opportunity for Turkey. So Erdogan has taken the opportunity to place himself as the premier protector of the Islamic world. And he's made a clarion call for the Muslim world that they should boycott everything French. They should boycott French goods. I mean, though it's another matter that we should actually start thinking what exactly is it that the Muslim world is going to boycott? The luxury brands probably, or the French champagne, or what is it? But he's given a call that the Muslim countries should boycott the French economy. So let's understand what is the geopolitics, or what is the play that's happening in the background, which has led Turkey to take this position, because Turkey is very keen to establish itself as the leader in the Islamic world. So let's understand what is the context, the geopolitical context, because of which Turkey is positioning itself in the way that it is.
Thank you, Naghma. I think Turkey is, and Erdogan, of course, has two issues here which he's trying to project. One, of course, this idea that suddenly the Islamic world seems bereft of leadership. And you have a situation where traditional leadership that used to come from Saudi Arabia, for example, is becoming difficult to sustain given the Saudis' complex geopolitical and foreign policy engagement that is developing. So clearly what you are looking at is an Islamic world that perhaps Erdogan feels needs a voice to project the Islamic sense of distress. So he is trying to, because he's also trying to cement his position domestically, this gives him an opportunity to rise up above the others, to make a case that, look, I'm the leader of the Islamic world, and I'm not afraid to take on countries like France, like the West, like NATO as an organization, and I'm going to establish myself. And so therefore he has taken a number of steps where clearly he's trying to position himself in that space. You also have to recognize that he is involved at least with France on a number of issue areas which are contested, whether it's Nagorno-Karabakh, whether it is Syria, Libya, where he is positioned differently. So clearly for him, this is something that is, that is an extension of that reality. The other aspect, of course, for Erdogan is that, this is a moment for him to give it back to NATO allies. In a sense, he has been saying, look, initially he was seen as this great reformer who would bring Turkey into the NATO fold. Now, I think there's a lot of sentiment in Turkey which feels that Europe has not reciprocated. Western Europe has not reciprocated the demand to, not in the NATO fold, in the European Union fold. And so there is this issue that, Turkey is of course a NATO member, but the divisions within the EU, which have been preventing Turkey to enter EU, has also, in fact, accentuated this fault line. And Turkey therefore has taken a position which builds Erdogan as the leader of the Islamic world, as a leader in a large geography, which sees that which believes that their voices are not being heard. And with the traditional leaders missing in action, this is a time to do it. And so you see Turkey, Pakistan, Malaysia, who are both, all of these states which are trying to project Islamic sense of global identity, are also looking at it from a very typical domestic political perspective, where all the leaders, Mahathir Mohamad, Erdogan, or even you have our own in the neighborhood, Mr. Imran Khan, all of them vying for some domestic acceptance, given that they all are either losing steam or are more or less running in a very authoritarian manner. So in that sense, I think Erdogan's actions can be understood. I think what he is trying to do will have grave repercussions for, not of course for his engagement with Europe going forward, but also I think for the internal contestation
Yes.
within the Islamic world as to who becomes the speaker, or who voices the discontent, or who voices the issues of the Islamic world to the
But
global community.
there is a contradiction there, that Iran, which is now, I mean, Ayatollah Khomeini rallying behind, very uncharacteristically rallying behind Erdogan in this case, they have nothing in common. Erdogan is trying to project himself as that as a Sunni Ayatollah in a way, and Iran is the Shia dominant nation, so they don't really have much in common. But in this case, we are seeing that Iran is with Turkey, Pakistan is with Turkey. Imran Khan has written a letter, like you said, that it increases the fracture between Turkey and the rest of Europe, not just between Ankara and Paris. So, other than that, all these countries that have come together and have become the voice right now against France, that is Turkey, Iran, and Pakistan. None of them have spoken a word when it comes to China. We know that China has placed the Uyghur Muslims in the camps, in its effort for when it's going forward with the cultural cleansing that it has been doing. In fact, Turkey has handed back some of the Uyghur Muslims, which China has demanded through other countries. They have sent back the Uyghur Muslims. So what is it that none of these people who are now trying to become the voice of the Islamic world or the Islamic countries have not uttered a word, even in the letter that Imran Khan has written, calling the Islamic world to come together, he does not mention China at all.
Yes, because essentially this is a political power play, that this is not about the defense of the Islamic world. This is more about either cementing their own positions
So
domestically
theology is
or,
just a springboard here.
yes, and so I think Shia and Sunni, Iran and Turkey, that is quite a contradiction. But that contradiction can be understood if you look at it from the perspective of how Iran is looking at a situation where Saudi Arab, UAE, Bahrain are coming together with Israel. You have a unique geopolitical moment in the Middle East where important relationships are changing, where traditional identities are changing, and where traditional geopolitical alignments are being either reconfigured in a manner that is perhaps very difficult for traditionalists to understand. But I think that's largely what is happening against the backdrop of geopolitics. So sometimes when we get carried away by looking at it through the prism of religion, we misunderstand that religion is merely a mask for the larger political agenda. So they are not bothered about their brethren in China. Why would they? Because China provides a great guarantee, both economic and increasingly now strategic. So if you can have a strategic partnership with China, that means you are trying to make a case to your traditional friends in terms of Pakistan and Turkey, the West. The West has been the traditional, guarantor for these countries. So suddenly now you see a different complexion emerging, a different engagement emerging. And so I don't think religion matters. I don't think they are bothered about what happens to the Uyghur Muslims in China. What matters is what happens to their domestic political standing, and what happens to the geopolitical alignments, geopolitical interests that are in flux. And I think that's why you see these strange combination of countries coming together. That's why you see this voice, and that is why you also see Saudi Arabia taking, or countries in the Middle East taking a much more subdued line on this question. Yes, they have condemned it, but not in the way that you have seen, for example, Turkey and Pakistan, and even a country like Malaysia do it. So clearly, I think they sense that this is a moment for them to make their voice heard. And for Iran, of course, this is a matter to get back into the Islamic world, where for a long time it had felt that it was considered as an outsider. So I think largely you see a new combination of forces emerging, and they will have great impact on the geopolitical relationships that emerge out of this. I don't see religion as being a major driver in this engagement. Religion is merely an instrument which is being
Yeah.
used to propagate very
Yes.
basic domestic political and geopolitical interests.
So absolutely, like you said, religion is just being used as a tool here. But we see that while there is a massive outrage in the Islamic world, in most of the Islamic countries, India has come out in full support of Macron a couple of times with official statements. But we've seen protests in India against Macron, which is surprising. It's not surprising, but because the world is so united with the social media that whatever happens in France, now small, relatively unknown organizations in places like Bhopal and many other places in India have seen massive big rallies, against Macron. So in India too, we see a division right now. There are those people who are completely against France. There are rallies being taken out. There have been instant huge gatherings, whereas officially India has come out in full support of France. And how do you see India's reaction vis-a-vis India and France relationship, and they're coming together and standing with each other as far as the fight against terror is concerned? It has been highly appreciated by France.
Well, I think diplomatically, I think India did what India had to do, because clearly India expects France to do a lot of things for India, and in France has been a very, very important friend for India, both in terms of what it does bilaterally, but also in multilateral institutions like the UN, where France has stood by India in difficult times. So I think, and of course, extremism and terrorism is something uh, that is broadly understood in similar ways in both countries. So I don't think that's clearly very contentious in that sense, that you have
Yes.
a
Mm.
problem which is viewed through similar prisms. But I think the challenge, and which I also felt in the diplomatic statement that India made, was relatively nuanced, because it talked about the personal attacks on Mr. Macron. It talked about that of course the kind of violence that we had seen is unacceptable, but also it did not wade into the larger theological issues which are under play, which are partly the debate within France. What is secularism, and how far freedom of expression can go. So I think there was an attempt to keep it at a level where, as far as India is concerned, our basic interests are preserved without wading into the domestic controversies in India. But see, of course, in India also, this is partly political. I've not really looked at what these organizations are doing, but certainly some of these have support from political parties. So, and this is not new. You can go all the way back to, in fact, this has happened in the past. But when India was negotiating the US-India nuclear deal, and the Iranian question came out, there was a lot of there were a lot of public protests, which I mean, I don't think people understood what the US-India nuclear deal was all about. But I think political mobilization was being done to ensure that that it was presented as if this is a great affront to Indian Muslims. I don't think Indian Muslims care one way or another in that sense. I mean, they care about some of these larger issues, but I don't think, insofar as Indian diplomacy or Indian engagement with a country like France. But if you mobilize it politically, certainly political mobilization will happen. It will manifest itself differently in different ways, and there'll be an attempt to different stakeholders in Indian polity would use it to a certain
Yes.
to a certain end.
Mm.
But I think largely Indian point has been made quite maturely in the diplomatic statement that India has come out with. And I think that is going to be India's position from now on matters such as these, because these are matters which are almost becoming very, very regular. We see these kind of happenings across Europe, across other countries as well. So, and India would be asked to do this. After all, Indian foreign secretary is visiting France, Germany, and UK. So clearly, when India expects them to stand up
Yes.
for terrorism when directed at India, those countries will also ask this of India. And I think India is responding to that challenge. And I thought it was a good way of navigating the difficult issues of how far do you wade into a domestic political or domestic religious issue, and how far you make it a diplomatic issue.
Yes, Harsh, I'll come to So Foreign Secretary Harsh Shringla's European tour. But before that, just want a quick comment from you on this issue itself. What's happened in France? I mean, the couple of incidents has also increased again or brought into focus the discussion or the debate around the increasing Islamophobia in the West. Well, France, we know, has been one of those countries which has also always upheld secularism and the secular values, and has been one of those countries which very openly came out against those against religious symbolism, wait the burqa or the pagri, or so it has always protested and wanted a really secular country. But do you think these kind of reactions that we are seeing from world over from the Muslim countries, and there is an increased division, it reduces the space for the liberal voice?
Absolutely, and I think this the kind of fault lines that we are witnessing is quite extraordinary, because in some ways, Charlie Hebdo, for example, is not the issue today. The issue is, and I think what has really struck at the heart of France, and to some extent the heart of the liberal world, is this idea that a teacher teaching in a classroom was beheaded. And I think the symbolism of this is very powerful. Whichever way you look at it, that he's or she, in this case he, of course, but a teacher is not there propagating a certain ideology. The teacher was teaching whatever he was supposed to teach, and to then take that act as something that is blasphemous, as something that cannot be done in liberal societies, and to extrapolate from that broader theological argument. I think that is where the problem, I think, to a large extent emerging.
Mm-hmm.
And for nations like France, which have, some would argue, very extreme definition of secularism. French secularism is really distinct from Indian secularism, for example, where where the Indian version has been that you can appropriate symbolism so long as you're doing it from every religion, whereas French version actually says no to every kind of symbolism in public space. So therefore, that question becomes more and more intriguing. And I think what is also challenging this problem is that you do have a situation that a large part of the Muslim community in France is ghettoized, lives in very squalid conditions, socioeconomically.
Yes, the suburbs of Paris.
So there is a tension as to how far what do you do with a population that can also get relatively easily radicalized. And I think this is now emerging as a pan-European problem. And I don't think any model in Europe has so far worked, given what we are seeing today, the consequences, whether you look Belgium, United Kingdom, France, even Germany and Switzerland, those countries which you never expected. So clearly the challenge, a big part of the challenge for these societies is to come to terms with their own internal engagement. And one, I think I have to mention this because it's, we are discussing it in an Indian context. A lot of the time in the initial, if you recall, 80s and 90s, there used to be a lot of hectoring from the Europeans to India. That, look, you don't do this, you have a human rights problem, you have this problem. Now, I think, if Indian version looks much more robust in terms of, yes, India has its own problems, both majoritarian and otherwise. But I think if you look at the Indian democracy's ability to manage its minorities, it's much more robust than what you see today in France or in Germany. I mean, they have the way certain sections are excluded from political processes, from governmental jobs. It's quite extraordinary. So I think perhaps they also need to look at some of the other models that are available, rather than claiming to have this prerogative of being one of the better models, which traditionally we thought, and we were made to believe, and that, look, the West has got it right. The Western liberal model got it right. And I think a lot of these questions are about the future of Western liberal order. And I hope that this conversation raises some of those issues, because it can't simply be about what is happening today in France, because this is going to be a recurring issue over the next few
it has been a recurring issue
decades.
in many of the countries, actually. Now, if we look at, you just mentioned the Foreign Secretary, Mr. Harsh Shringla is traveling to Europe. He's starting his trip from Paris and India-France relationship. is at a very important juncture right now. He's also traveling to Berlin and London. We know that in his latest book, Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar had said that now one of the action points, these days is, to look at Europe, to cultivate Europe. So how important is this trip when we, look at all the countries that he's visiting at a time like this, when India has also come out in support of France? He's also going to be starting the trip from Paris, moving on to Berlin and London, because EU is one of the biggest trading partners of India. So the significance of this trip right now.
I think it's quite symbolic. If you look at the symbolism attached to this visit, it's quite important because Mr. Shringla is, these are his first countries out of the subcontinent. So in that sense, we can assume that Europe will continue to be one of the most important destinations for our diplomats and very important priority for our diplomacy. I think the reason is relatively simple in that sense that, look, a lot of change is happening in the world, and we tend to assume that Europe is becoming less relevant. In some ways it is. Center of gravity is shifting to Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific will demand a lot of attention. But what Europe, old Europe in particular, does is that it gives a certain stability to the world order, which otherwise would be, in a complete disarray. You look at any other region of the world, there is great degree of instability, whereas old Europe still stands as an exemplar of what's the best way of sort of conducting or managing the regional affairs and therefore global affairs. So one aspect is for India to engage with Europe, countries like Britain, Germany, and France is very important because of the larger global convergence on issues of global governance. So there, whether it's data, whether it's technology, whether it's a future of work, whether it's green transitions or it's sustainable development, all these issues, there is no real difference, and India, of course, wants to work more closely with these countries, as we have seen, for example, International Solar Alliance with France. The other issue, of course, is India's, there is a change in EU's perception of what is happening in the world. For a long time, European Union countries like France, Germany, especially countries like Germany, did not want to play the balance of power game. This European Union very famously said, we don't do geopolitics. Now they are doing geopolitics. Now they recognize the challenge China poses. Now they recognize how important Indo-Pacific is. So you have a European Union Indo-Pacific strategy. You have Germany coming out with an Indo-Pacific strategy. France and of course UK and Britain are traditional Indo-Pacific powers. So you see a new realization about the role of these countries, the role of European Union in Indo-Pacific, and that is good for India because that is something that that brings like-minded countries in Indo-Pacific. That is something that India would want to that Europe does on a greater scale, much more frequently, and with a greater ambition. So I think that the changing understanding of geopolitics in the region, in Indo-Pacific and beyond, and bilateral convergence on issues of global governance, as well as importance for India in capacity building. I think this brings these countries, this makes the issues make Europe very, very important for India as India navigates to a new future, as India makes its foreign policy more closely aligned with its domestic developmental imperatives.
All right. So thank you so much for that analysis, Harsh. That's all we have time for on this episode. This has been a very interesting week. We've had a rather successful India-US 2+2 ministerial dialogue, where again, India and US have, the deals that have been signed, the pacts that have been signed, BECA has been signed. India and US have decided to come together and work as force multipliers in this region. Also, we have a very interesting week coming up because of the US election, the presidential election. So we'll keep a very close eye at that and discuss that next week. But that's it from us for this week. Thank you so much.